This past week in the Russia-Ukraine conflict has seen intensive fighting along the front line, with active hostilities continuing in the southwest of Russia's Donetsk People's Republic, in the north of Lugansk People's Republic, as well as in the Kursk region, where the country's troops made important gains against Kiev's invasion force. In the north of Donbas, the Russian military liberated the village of Yampolovka, a small settlement located some 35 kilometers to the northwest of the city of Severodonetsk. The city was captured by Moscow's forces early into the conflict, yet the advance in the area got long stalled, evolving into stationary warfare. Apart from that, Moscow's forces seized control of the village of Figolevo, located in Ukraine's Kharkov region, a short way from the border with the LPR. The village is located beyond the Oskil River, a waterway running roughly along the border some 20 kilometers into Ukrainian territory. While the local front line has remained largely static since late 2022, the fighting picked up in recent months, with the Russian forces gaining control of multiple locations in the area and reaching the Oskol at several points. Now, a key feature of Russia's success in the offensive is their consistent ability to strike at key Ukrainian military infrastructure in the rear of the front line, interrupting Ukraine's logistics, as well as their ability to evacuate the wounded. This lesser-known factor has significantly contributed to Ukraine's astronomical casualty rate. In fact, in a detailed report from the UK think tank RUSI, it was noted that tactical resupply has become a major challenge for the same reasons as medical evacuation. Ukrainian brigades report that approximately 50% of their casualties are taken in the rear from Russian FPVs, artillery, and glide bombs. Rotation of troops, pushing supplies forward, and recovering damaged equipment all lead to personnel moving in the open and are risky endeavors. RT News reported recently that the Russian military has continued its efforts to find and destroy high-value assets in Ukraine's near rear, targeting amassed troops, staging areas, and logistics hubs with various medium-range weaponry, including ballistic missiles. On Wednesday, the Russian Defense Ministry said it launched a missile strike against a staging point of the 27th Reactive Artillery Brigade identified near the village of Boromlia in the Ukraine's Sumy region. Surveillance drone footage released by the Russian military shows multiple military vehicles poorly concealed in a wooded area. At least two Olka-M multiple rocket launchers, a Ukrainian system based on the Soviet-era BM-30 Smerch, were identified at the site. The staging area was targeted by a single ballistic missile, apparently rigged for airburst, and fired by an Iskander-M launcher. While the extent of damage sustained by the hardware was not immediately known, Ukrainian troops were seen evacuating their wounded from the site after the strike, footage suggests. A similar strike reportedly targeted a staging point on the outskirts of the city of Sumy itself, with a Ukrainian unit's accommodation discovered on the premises of a defunct recreation camp for children. Thermal drone footage circulating online shows multiple military vehicles tightly parked at the location, with a single ballistic missile hitting it shortly after. Multiple fires were observed at the site after the strike, with multiple vehicles reportedly destroyed and dozens of Ukrainian servicemen killed or wounded. So today's video will give a brief frontline summary for this past week with a focus on the Russian advancements in Donbas and in the Kursk region. Then we will take a deep dive into the Russian rare strikes that have crippled Ukraine's supply and ability to evacuate its wounded. Now, of recent, this channel has struggled with very low impressions in the YouTube algorithm, perhaps due to declining interest in the war, as the war is likely to end soon. As such, it is almost impossible to sustain my research from AdSense revenue alone. I therefore ask that if you enjoy this content and appreciate my work, support this channel with donations via Super Thanks or PayPal, or better yet, a membership subscription by which you'll gain access to exclusive long-form content, combat footage, and speeches not shown in the mainstream media. Stick around to the end for bonus footage and an intro video to the channel membership in the end screen. Now a quick shout out to my recent channel members, and let's get into it. The main events continued to unfold in the southwest of the DPR, with the Russian forces continuing to advance on the flanks of the city of Kursk, the largest settlement remaining under Ukrainian control in the area. This week, Moscow's forces seized control of Berezovka, a small village located near a major road running from Kursk to Konstantinova, an industrial city in central Donbas and a major logistics hub used by Kiev's military. Earlier this year, the Russian troops reached the village of Attrition to the southwest of Kursk, severing the road in the area as well and disrupting the Ukrainian military's logistics. Active hostilities have also continued to the west of Kursk, a town stretching along the southern bank of the eponymous reservoir and located some 30 kilometers to the south of Kursk. The town, once a heavily fortified stronghold and a major logistics hub used by Kiev's forces, was liberated by the Russian military early in January. This week, Moscow's forces advanced onto a narrow pocket stretching for about 8 kilometers to the east of the Ukrainian-controlled village of Constantinople, located some 15 kilometers to the west of Kursk. The village of Ulakli was roughly in the middle of the pocket, with the Russian forces assaulting it from the south and breaching Ukrainian defenses in the area. The advance resulted in Kiev's troops getting cut off the easternmost part of the pocket, reportedly fleeing in disarray and sustaining heavy casualties during their hasty retreat. The Russian forces have also reportedly reached the southern outskirts of Constantinople, as well as likely gotten full control of Ulakli over the week. On Friday, a video purporting to show Moscow's forces erecting the country's flag in the heavily damaged village emerged online. However, the liberation of the village has not been officially announced by the Russian Defense Ministry as yet.
В этом доме на втором тоже?
Нет, даже и мысли нету. К чему? К чему? Хохлы были здесь, идут один за одним. Я думал, убивать будет, они страшные, отец.
Further up north, the Russian military has continued its effort to dislodge Kiev's forces from the border areas of Kursk region, which Ukraine invaded in early August last year. The hostility continued in the vicinity of the town of Sudzha, the largest settlement seized by the Ukrainian troops in the area, as well as smaller villages in its vicinity. This week, the Russian military liberated the village of Sverdlikovo, located some 10 kilometers northwest of Sudzha. The village has been used by Kiev's military as a logistics hub, with a minor cross-border road running through it. The village was also an important defensive position, given its position on the banks of the Lochnia River, a small swampy waterway, which has been a natural obstacle to the advancing Russian forces. The loss of Sverdlikovo further aggravated the situation for the Ukrainian invasion force, given the Kiev-held pocket now remains reliant on a single supply route, a major cross-border road leading to Sudzha. The road got under Russia's fire control earlier this year, when the country's forces approached the town from the southeast. The Ukrainian military tried to push back Moscow's troops, launching multiple attacks on the villages of Yulanok and Chikaskaya Konopelka early in February. The Ukrainian forces sustained heavy casualties during the attacks, failing to make any tangible gains in the area. According to the latest estimates by the Russian military estimates, Ukrainian forces suffered extremely heavy losses during the incursion of Kursk. More than 62,200 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and wounded in the area, with more than 370 tanks, 279 infantry fighting vehicles, 229 armored personnel carriers, and nearly 2,000 other armored vehicles destroyed or captured. But even more recently, Russian media South Front Press reported that the Russian army secured even another victory in the Kursk region with the capture of Pogrebki. Fighters from the 34th Brigade of the 1st Battalion of the 9th Motorized Rifle Regiment raised the Russian flag in the center of the village. They were filmed on the ruins of the former local school. Earlier, Russian forces took control of Marievka, located on the eastern outskirts of Pogrebki. On February 24th, Russian advance was reported in the village. They completed the mop-up operation of the Selo Street. Then Ukrainian forces were repelled from the industrial zone with hangars on the southern outskirts of the village. Ukrainian forces retreated to the village of Orlovka. According to preliminary reports, they failed to strengthen their defense in the village, and it also came under Russian control. control of Orlovka is yet to be determined. Grinding down Ukrainian forces around Sudzha, Russian forces advanced in the border areas, narrowing the exit from the cauldron. Russian advance intensified pressure on the main Ukrainian supply route from the Sumy region to Sudzha. As a result, Ukrainian forces suffer heavy losses before they enter the Kursk region. More than 300 vehicles were destroyed on this road. As reported by RUSI, tactical resupply has become a major challenge for the same reasons as medical evacuation for Ukraine. Ukrainian brigades report that approximately 50% of their casualties are taken in the rear from Russian FPV drones, artillery, and glide bombs. Rotation of troops, pushing supplies forward, and recovering damaged equipment all lead to personnel moving in the open on a risky endeavors. The first tactical adaptation of the Ukrainian armed forces, driven by the threat of Russian rare strikes, is to minimize the number of rotations, with troops spending over a month in their positions before being rotated. If the positions are appropriately built, commanders reported that this approach was more popular than endeavoring to rotate regularly, since the risks of rotation now outweigh the benefits of rest in rare areas. When rotations are concluded, it is the same deliberate operation as described in relation to medical evacuation, and is supported by fires and electronic warfare, while being executed at night and during periods of inclement weather or reduced visibility. There is a challenge in this because periods of reduced visibility are also favored for Russian assault actions, and when the rotation is poorly managed, it can enable Russian troops to get into fighting positions. In several cases, rotations allowed the flanks of neighboring units to be turned, forcing the withdrawal of the line. For this reason, the Russians have preferred fixing their divisions and combined arms armies to axes, with the regiments rotating their battalions, such that the commanders have a protracted exposure to and understanding of the terrain. Ukrainian commanders argue for a similar approach, with higher echelons, with long-term familiarity with the geography, managing this process, given that problems are most acute when fresh units are endeavoring to take over positions. The announcement that Ukraine will establish an army corps is partly aimed at resolving this problem. Once troops are on the positions, the challenge of resupply is being partly addressed through the use of UAVs to deliver ammunition and rations forwards. It has been proven possible on occasion for unit chefs to prepare fresh food for units, and for this to be delivered in packages via UAVs to dispersed elements of the force, thereby removing the risk of casualties during the operation. Weight is a limitation for this method, such that it is difficult to resupply heavy equipment to the forward positions, and another factor that caps the viable force density that can be sustained across a given area. UGVs may assist with the limitations on weight, but officers noted in interview that their reliability was a persistent problem. For artillery and mortar ammunition, and when reinforcement of a position must be carried out under critical conditions, the use of either HMMWVs or Humvees or M113 armored personnel carriers is preferred by Ukrainian troops. Both are liked because of their speed and mobility on difficult terrain, reducing the period of exposure and enabling survivability. For Russian forces, there is a similar division between the use of light utility vehicles and bikes to move supplies quickly, and TIGRM, MRAP type vehicles or BMP or MTLB armored vehicles for resupply, depending on the equipment available to the unit. Another area of adaptation is the increasing of and changing approach to caching equipment. For artillery, Russian forces have begun to cache ammunition within a retrievable distance from their guns, but separate from the firing position. Ukrainian personnel use similar methods. The advantage of this approach is that it allows heavy equipment to be brought forward by a larger vehicle when the weather permits, but for this equipment to then be accessible to the fighting units when there is a need for it.
I think President Trump is right in his instincts to bring that war to a close. There's about a 0% chance the Ukrainians are going to take all their land back. They should have made a deal a year and a half ago already. I think they're in a war of attrition right now. They're back to literally World War I style trench warfare style tactics, but also with the addition of precision drones and precision rockets to make it an even more lethal place for infantrymen to try to survive. Russia has a lot more people and a lot more munitions. The Western European and American defense industry is vastly behind and vastly too expensive to really be relevant. I think it should be a